War in Afghanistan, 2001 to 2018, Impact on Afghan Society. Civilian casualties. According to the Watson Institute for International Studies Costs of War project, roughly 31,000 civilians had been killed as a result of the war up to the middle of 2016. A report titled Body Count put together by Physicians for Social Responsibility, Physicians for Global Survival and the Nobel Peace Prize-winning International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, IPN, concluded that 106,000 to 170,000 civilians have been killed as a result of the fighting in Afghanistan at the hands of all parties to the conflict. A UN report over the year 2009 stated that, of the 1,500 civilians having died from January until the end of August 2009, 70% were blamed on anti-government elements. The U.S. website of the Weekly Standard stated in 2010, referring to a UN report, that 76% of civilian deaths in Afghanistan over the past year had been caused by the Taliban. That is a misquotation of the UNAMA report, which does not attribute numbers of deaths directly to the Taliban, but to anti-government elements, AGE, and to pro-government forces, PGF. Over the period January until June 2010, indeed the report published in August 2010 stated that, of all 3,268 civilian casualties, dead or wounded, 2,477 casualties, 76%, were caused by AGE, 386 caused by PGF, 11%. Over the whole of 2010, with a total of 2,777 civilians killed, the UN reported 2,080 civilian deaths caused by anti-government elements, 75%, pro-government forces caused 440 deaths, and 257 deaths could not be attributed to any party. In July 2011, a UN report said 1,462 non-combatants died in the first 6 months of 2011, insurgents 80%. In 2011 a record 3,021 civilians were killed, the fifth successive annual rise. According to a UN report, in 2013 there were 2,959 civilian deaths with 74% being blamed on anti-government forces, 8% on Afghan security forces, 3% on ISAF forces, 10% to ground engagements between anti-government forces and pro-government forces, and 5% of the deaths were unattributed. 60% of Afghans have direct personal experience and most others report suffering a range of hardships. 96% have been affected either personally or from the wider consequences. In 2015, according to the United Nations, UN, annual report, there were 3,545 civilian deaths and 7,457 people wounded. The anti-government elements were responsible for 62% of the civilians killed or wounded. The pro-government forces caused 17% of civilian deaths and injuries, including United States and NATO troops, which were responsible for about 2% of the casualties. In 2016, a total of 3,498 civilians' deaths and 7,920 injuries were recorded by the United Nations. The UN attributed 61% of casualties to anti-government forces. Afghan security forces caused about 20% of the overall casualties, while pro-government militias and Resolute Support Mission caused 2% each. Airstrikes by US and NATO warplanes resulted in at least 127 civilian deaths and 108 injuries, while the Afghan Air Force accounted for at least 85 deaths and 167 injuries. The UN was not able to attribute responsibility for the remaining 38 deaths and 65 injuries resulting from airstrikes. During the parliamentary elections on October 20, 2018, several explosions targeting the polling stations took place. At least 36 people were killed and 130 were injured. Previously, 10 election candidates were killed during the campaigning by the Taliban and the Islamic State group. On December 28, 2018, a report issued by UNICEF revealed that during the first 9 months of 2018, 5,000 children were killed or injured in Afghanistan. Manuel Fontaine, UNICEF Director of Emergency Programs, said the world has forgotten children living in conflict zones. Health. According to Nicholas Christoph, improved healthcare resulting from the war has saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Refugees. Since 2001, more than 5.7 million former refugees have returned to Afghanistan, but 2.2 million others remained refugees in 2013. In January 2013, the UN estimated that 547,550 were internally displaced persons, a 25% increase over the 447,547 IDPs estimated for January 2012. Interpreters. Afghans who interpreted for the British Army have been tortured and killed in Afghanistan, including their families. As of May 2018, the UK government has not resettled any interpreter or family member in the UK. Drug trade. From 1996 to 1999, the Taliban controlled 96% of Afghanistan's poppy fields and made opium its largest source of revenue. Taxes on opium exports became one of the mainstays of Taliban income. According to Rashid, drug money funded the weapons, ammunition and fuel for the war. In the New York Times, the finance minister of the United Front, Wahidullah Sabawun, declared the Taliban had no annual budget but that they appear to spend $300 million a year, nearly all of it on war. He added that the Taliban had come to increasingly rely on three sources of money: poppy, the Pakistanis and bin Laden. By 2000, Afghanistan accounted for an estimated 75% of the world's opium supply and in 2000 produced an estimated 3,276 tons from 82,171 hectares, 203,050 acres. Omar then banned opium cultivation and production dropped to an estimated 74 metric tons from 1,685 hectares, 4,160 acres. Some observers say the ban, which came in a bid for international recognition at the United Nations, was issued only to raise opium prices and increase profit from the sale of large existing stockpiles. 1999 had yielded a record crop and had been followed by a lower but still large 2000 harvest. The trafficking of accumulated stocks continued in 2000 and 2001. In 2002, the UN mentioned the existence of significant stocks of opiate accumulated during previous years of bumper harvests. In September 2001, before 11th of September attacks against the U.S. The Taliban allegedly authorized Afghan peasants to sow opium again. Soon after the invasion, opium production increased markedly. By 2005, Afghanistan was producing 90% of the world's opium, most of which was processed into heroin and sold in Europe and Russia. In 2009, the BBC reported that UN findings say an opium market worth $65 billion, £39 billion, funds global terrorism, caters to 15 million addicts, and kills 100,000 people every year. Public education. As of 2017, the Afghan government has cooperated with Taliban forces to provide education services. In Kogiani district, the government is given nominal control by local Taliban fighters in return for paying the wages of teachers whom the Taliban appoint in local schools. Girls' education. As of 2013, 8.2 million Afghans attended school, including 3.2 million girls, up from 1.2 million in 2001, including fewer than 50,000 girls. While the Taliban have typically opposed girls' education, in 2017 in Kogiani district it has allowed girls to receive education in order to improve its standing among local residents.